Merry Christmas, Officer Hansel is definitely a very creative film. I genuinely don't know what to make of it because it seemed like it was going to be a really sweet, moving, uplifting Christmas film, and then it ended up being a little bit ridiculous, but possibly in a way that's quite charming. It started off like it was a film that took itself seriously and was trying to deliver this really important narrative. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But after about, I want to say about 20 minutes, well, something happened. I'll tell you the something in a moment and I'll explain in detail what that is. It's not a spoiler. Something happens though, and I kind of realised at that point that it wasn't going to be, for the most part, a moving, uplifting story. It was just going to be a slightly ludicrous comedy, and I don't think the film takes itself seriously. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but hopefully that will give you an indication of the style of storytelling. And then when I tell you that the cast play multiple characters, that should also tell you how much it doesn't really take itself seriously. And I'll talk about that more in a moment, but I won't spoil it in case you decide to watch it. But what I will say is that if the dog wasn't in it, and the narrative worked without the dog, it could in theory work without the dog, it would have been unwatchable. But the dog made it rather adorable, and I ultimately didn't mind it, but I wouldn't be watching it again. This was released in 2022. It's written and directed by Cain and Colin Kaye. And we have a tiny, tiny cast, which is not a problem. We have Glam Wilson, Colin Kaye, Cain, and then we have Hansel playing Officer Hansel. And Hansel is this adorable little dog. And the narrative started out quite seriously. And this is what I thought it was going to be about. Officer Wilson, played by Colin Kaye, is not in the best of health, and he really should be retiring from the force. But to stay on the payroll, he has to do something. If he wants to stay on the payroll, this is something he has to do. He ends up looking after this dog called Hansel, and initially I thought it was going to be about an officer in ill health who regains his lust for life through the eyes of an adorable little dog. That would have been such an uplifting, inspiring, moving narrative. And honestly, I wish they'd just stuck with that because it becomes really gimmicky and silly. And if that's what you're looking for, you might enjoy the film. But I think they would have had a much better film if they'd lent more into that and didn't turn this into a giant gimmick. And the moment I realised the film was not taking itself seriously is when Officer Wilson, Hankmore Wilson, visits his Aunt Lucille, and Colin Kaye also plays his aunt. He plays both Officer Wilson and Officer Wilson's aunt. And that's the moment I realised this film was not taking itself seriously. And honestly, it felt a little bit ridiculous and not a good idea at all. I didn't understand the decision there. It definitely made the film feel very amateurish, and I personally didn't find that it worked very well. However, we do get a lot of Officer Hansel. He is in pretty much the entire thing, and I do love watching the dog. And the narrative also revolves around this package thief, this thief who's stealing people's packages. Obviously, in the run-up to Christmas, people are doing a lot of ordering, a lot of packages are getting delivered. Well, they're not getting delivered. That's kind of the problem. The thief is stealing them. And we have Officer Hansel taking an important role in this story. And that part of it is very sweet. And as I said at the beginning, they could have done this film without the dog, by which I mean it could have been a film about an officer trying to stop a package thief. And it would have worked just as well. I think the narrative would have worked as well. So the decision to include the dog was a very good decision because the dog, little Hansel, made it a watchable film. If they didn't have the same characters playing, or the same actors rather, playing multiple characters, it also would have been a better film. Because it just instantly told me that they're not taking it seriously. And had they gone in the direction that I thought they were going in, where it was a moving, uplifting film about an officer who found a new enthusiasm for life because he was looking after this little dog, that would have been gorgeous. all against a Christmas backdrop, of course. That would have been a really beautiful story. So there was a lot of potential, and unfortunately, I think they just went in completely the wrong direction with this. It's not a good film, it's not a good narrative. The performances are not that good either. They're not horrendous, but they're not very good. They're not brilliant. So the only really good thing about this is the dog, but the dog is in it so much that meant I was enjoying quite a lot of watching the film because I was enjoying watching the dog. So they definitely made the right decision to include Hansel pretty much right throughout the entire film. And I say that because sometimes there are films with animals, but the animals are barely in it. Thankfully, that's not the case here. Do I recommend it? Only if you love dogs. Only if you want to watch a film about dogs. If you're looking for a good narrative, this isn't it. Good performances, this isn't it. The camera works fine. We have some really nice settings. Visually, the scenery, all really appealing. So visually, it is a very good film. I have no problems there at all. But the actual story and the characters, not good at all. So proceed with caution. You might like it. If you like dogs, you'll certainly love Hansel. He is so beautiful. Hansel saved the film. It could have been so much more. I think they made some really ludicrous decisions, which meant that it's ultimately not a good film. But Hansel is certainly a very cute dog.